Now this is a Kubal family, of course, as you see there, and there's a lot of things about this. This is the father, and this is the mother, and these were all the children. This one right here was your grandpa. He was James Jr., but everybody called him. Yeah, what did they call him? Ben. Everybody called him Ben.
Called him Ben, huh?
He only lived to be about 28 years old.
Wow. What happened?
Well, the country had this flu epidemic. They had no antibiotics or anything, and the flu epidemic came around 1918, around there, and people were dying all over. And the story I heard is they didn't have enough caskets to bury him. It was really bad. And they said, was never real strong. And I don't know why. Anyway, and they were married. He was married to Mary, and Mary Hetzler, the other side. And they said that all the Kubals were mad at the Hetzlers. They're mad at Mary, his wife, which would have been my husband's dad, because they had all those businesses. They were starting to do this businesses down by the lake.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't like anything to do with the lake. They lived in Crown Point and want anything to do with it.
Oh.
And Mary, still would take the horse and buggy and ride down to Cedar Lake. Well, the
That
old
must be
man,
the father, yeah, okay.
he complained about that. She's working that horse too much. She was working that horse too much. And later I heard he got some kind of a motorcycle. And he would go down the lake on the motorcycle.
Mm.
But they didn't like the lake or anything to do with the lake. Well, the lake was pretty wild. So anyway, what had happened is Uncle George had gotten sick. And Uncle George had that I showed you that hotel deal that they moved across the street.
Right,
okay.
right.
Well, he had a bar in there. They all had the bars and food, I guess, or something. And he got sick. And I think he had the flu. And they asked if he could come down and help work. So Mary, very aggressive, said, Ben, they need you down there. So he came down, and I don't know if he tended the bar or what he did. Heard that he worked in the bar or something. Anyway, not too long later, he got sick. And they figured that he got flu from Uncle George or in that area or whatever. Well, everybody was getting it. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't real strong, so he ended up, they had bought a house in Crown Point, and it was sort of close to where the Hetzlers had their house, right here.
So he married
Mary,
and then they bought a house in Crown Point? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they bought one in Crown Point. And we should have kept it, really. So what happened is they were living there, and she was very, aggressive and wanting getting ahead. She'd have a big garden, and she had tomatoes, whole bunches of tomatoes. And I got it from Aunt Rose. This is Aunt Rose, who never married. Aunt Rose is the one we'd get coffee cakes from, and she was a seamstress. He was too.
The father, okay.
This gal, Aunt Rose, and him had a dry cleaning store in
Oh, I saw
Crown
the
Point.
sign down in your basement, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And they also were seamstress. They did sewing, and she could take a fur coat and make a fur coat or anything. She was really great. I really loved her. She became like my mother. And anytime I was going to go to a convention or something, I'd buy a lot of clothes, and I'd run up to Aunt Rose to order them. She'd do them for me in one day, and always calling me up. I baked you a pie, or I baked. She was a sweetheart, and she had to work real hard. Lived on here on the old homestead. All the rest left, and she kept that up as much as she could, and it was hard because it wasn't much of a house. But it was in a good location.
So Rose and Mary lived there together?
No.
No.
No, they never lived there. This is all these people
The-
home
Oh,
from
okay.
the
They
time
all
they were
lived there.
growing
Oh,
up.
okay. All right. I see.
The mother and father and the kids all lived there.
All right.
Then when he married Mary, they bought a place close by there.
All right.
In fact, we
Okay,
could
I
we
see.
could even drive by it and see it, and because somebody's bought it and put a lot of money in it. But they bought this house, and they were living there, and then she became pregnant with Jimmy, which is your grandpa, and they were living there, and then he got sick. Like I said, went down to Cedar Lake, got sick. They blamed it on Cedar Lake. They blamed it on Mary, and he was in bed. They didn't have hospitals. He was in bed there, and Rose stayed there and was taking care of him. And Mary, they all say, this one was a fightsy one. You can tell that by looking at. She was the youngest girl, and this was the
Irene.
youngest boy, Otto. This is Otto here. He was a real good basketball player at high school, Crown Point High School. So, but anyway, she was there taking care of him, and he was really sick. And Mary was downstairs saving all those tomatoes. She was canning them. So this one always says, yeah, she didn't care enough to be with her husband. She was more important to can tomatoes, you know.
Oh.
You know, this is family stuff.
Right. Right.
So he died. Rose was taking care of him when he died.
And how long after Jim was born was that? How old was Jim?
About 3.
3. Wow.
Yeah, about 3. He was born in 1916. And I think he died in either 1918, 1919, or something like that. It was right during the, you can read it in history about, and it'll come up, about the terrible flu epidemic. Went all through this country. And so, had he been real strong, but they said that he always had a little problem with something, they don't know what it was. His lungs or something were not real strong. But he adored Jimmy, his son, and they had the funeral back then. They didn't have funeral home. They had it at this house.
At the house.
Yeah, they had his body there, and they all tell about how Jimmy was so cute, and he didn't know. He thought he went up with an orange to the casket where his daddy was in, and said, wanted his daddy to peel his orange, because his daddy always peeled his orange.
Sad.
That shook up the whole family
Right.
bad. They all told me about that, how Jimmy wanted his orange and thought that his daddy could peel his orange. But so after that, Mary, she didn't stay very long in Crown Point. She took Jimmy and she moved back to Cedar Lake, where all the action was and all the money was, you know. And she worked hard doing, like the place where we had breakfast. That was Mother's pantry. She baked pies and all that in there. And the part that we were in was all open, and they had ticket booths there for people to take boat rides. And Mary would rent that space to people that owned speedboats, those old wooden speedboats. What did they call them? They were beautiful boats. Nobody could afford boats then, so it was a big deal to take a boat ride.
Okay.
So for $1 or something, you'd take a ride all the way around the lake, you know. So she rented the space for them to do that, you know.
To sell their tickets.
Sell tickets,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know too much about the rest. The rest of them were all, I knew them all. They're on my wedding pictures with Jim. This one, it was Aunt Irene. No, that's Aunt Helen. This is Aunt Irene. And this was Albina up here, and this was Marie. Some of these I never knew. I knew Albina, and I knew Aunt Helen. She moved to Rensselaer. And Rose stayed in Crown Point, and he married a gal from Valparaiso, and this is what he looked like down here, and they moved out to, what was it? Oregon, I think. Where did they raise all the potatoes?
Idaho?
Idaho, right, Idaho. He moved out there and that was when they would give you land if you wanted it.
Right. Homestead Act. Yeah.
So Jim tells about when he was he was about out of high school. He went on a trip like Tim's doing. I mean, Matt.
Yeah.
he went on a trip with his friend. They went west, and they stopped there with Otto and Rose. Her name was Rose, his wife, and they were living in like a cave. They dug it out, and that's all they had.
Wow.
They started having children, and then they built a house. But when they first got there, they probably just him and her and maybe one. Oh yeah, there's a little sad story. They had like an irrigation thing for their potatoes. He was raising potatoes right away, and there was a stream there, and they had a little girl. They had just Dorothy, her name was, and she was pregnant with another baby, and this little girl wandered out there and drowned in that stream.
Oh, sad.
And you know, in 3 weeks she had another baby, and it was a girl. Then from then on she had all boys. She had about 4 boys. But she was a great gal, and she lived to be. She came to my home a lot. You might have even seen her if you ever came up for. Yeah, you guys would come up 4th of July. She often was there, and.
You're talking about Rose, Otto's wife.
Otto's wife,
Right.
yeah, Rose. Because it's confusing because this
His
was Aunt
sister
Rose.
was Rose too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but they made it big time. He sold potatoes, and he ended up being a flying farmer or something. He got his own plane and had his own landing strip, and he was the head of all these. What did they call them? Flying farmers or something? He was the head of them all, and he used to fly out to Crown Point, land at the airport there. They'd come a lot of times, and Rose would fly with them, and she'd always have one of the boys with her.
So is that the earliest flyer that you can find in the family?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, he was flying just about the time that Jim was in the service, because he was the youngest one in the family.
So he wasn't
He wasn't an awful lot older than
Jim.
Jim.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but well, there was another. Let's see, which one was it? There was another one that had a son and a daughter. Wasn't Albina? I guess it was this Marie. I didn't know her, but they ended up. They had a son and a daughter, and that son flew. That would be Jim's first cousin.
First cousin.
Yeah, his name was John. I'm trying to think what their last name was. Well, can't. So, but, because they married, and she had married, so it was a different name.
Right.
And he flew. In fact, he worked for some corporate America thing.
Oh, he flew
I think it
commercial.
was Kleenex or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he flew for the company. In other words, that's when they didn't have their jet, their own or something. He flew them all over. Yeah. Yeah, he was quite a guy. Kind of crazy. But that's about it on the family. Oh, Irene was the youngest. She married a young man. Now, I don't know where he was from, but his, let's see now, get my thing straight. Uncle Otto. She was married to Otto. What was her last
No.
name?
That's Otto.
Yeah, I know, but there
But
was
a different Otto.
Yeah.
Oh,
was
Lord,
it?
that's
Now wait a
confusing.
minute. Was it Otto?
That would be funny because Otto married someone the same name of his sister, and
Yeah.
Irene married the same name, somebody of the same
Yeah.
name as her brother.
Yeah. Irene and I think it was Irene and Oscar. not
Oscar,
Otto.
okay.
Oscar. Lundy. Their name was Lundy, and they moved to Chicago, and she was, like I said, was the youngest one in the family. So Rose liked to go to Chicago to see Irene, and on Thanksgiving, we would take her, so we got included in Thanksgiving always at Irene and Oscar Lundy's. He had a responsible job. He worked down at the Furniture Mart, and he every day would commute on the train down to the Furniture Mart in Chicago, and he wrote sort of, I don't know what you would call them, pamphlets or newsletters or stuff to do with the mart. He wrote up all that all the time, was going out all the time. And he had quite a responsible job there. And he loved it. He liked it a lot.
So what did they do? What about the Jim's grandparents?
Grandparents?
Yeah.
Well, you know, they moved all over. They had been up in, it's kind of a mystery about them. I don't know. They had farms, I believe, at one time. He tried to farm, and it didn't come out too well. And somebody told me that they lived in, tried to farm somewhere out in Kansas or somewhere, and that didn't work. And then I heard also that he had children everywhere they went, but they've all lost track of some of them, more than these.
You mean with different women?
Yes.
Besides the wife?
Well, it might have been with her. I don't even
okay.
know.
That maybe
So-
they just didn't come along.
They both came from, was it German? I don't know. I have a write-up on where they came from.
The children grew up and left, you mean, at each time, or did they?
What'd she say?
How did they end up having children everywhere? That's a
I
little
don't
confusing.
know. But these were their youngest bunch. Always said they never could get a hold of half of the Kubal, know where they were. So I don't know how true that was. That's what they said. There was other children, other places, and Kubal is not a real a name that you see everywhere.
Right.
So, but they had this house on the south side of Chicago, a real nice neighborhood, and they had two girls, and then we would go there, and of course it started with Rose wanting to go. We take Rose. I remember I was up there when, well, not when your dad was a baby, but I know when Brian was a baby. I remember going in. He was born the 15th of November, and I remember we went up there on Thanksgiving just a couple of weeks later.
Wow.
And I took Brian in and laid him on the bed in their bed. No, they all had to go see him, you know, and calling the girls in. They were playing outside and come in and see the new baby and all that stuff. So, but we'd have a great day. They'd have, they were good cooks. She was a good cook too. And they cooked huge Thanksgiving meal. And then in the afternoon, the cards come out. They always played cards. Here would come the cards. I don't know what they played, probably pinochle or something. I don't know. But
You didn't play?
I didn't know.
No.
That was a common thing. Rose and Irene and Oscar and I don't know who else played. Jim probably. Now the cards would come. Everybody played cards. That was a big thing. And I think I took care of Brian and watched the TV. We had a beginning of TV then, you know, black and white.
Black and white, sure.
Yeah, and that's about all. It was a nice neighborhood. It was a great neighborhood, and the girls went to school, and the one girl went to college, and the other girl later on moved to IU. In fact, because her son was going to school at IU. She liked it down there. So.
In Bloomington.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And she had a bad marriage, got a divorce, and it really was a sad story. She had her oldest son. She was having trouble with her husband, drinking a lot, but they were trying to stick together, and they went away for a weekend right towards the end of the oldest one's school year. He's just graduating, went to the prom and all that. And they went away on a weekend, and they left the two older boys alone at home, which was probably a mistake. Anyway, the oldest boy hung himself in the backyard.
What happened?
Hung himself.
I think he was in. They covered it up, but I guess he was into drugs. I guess I don't know. Yeah, and the other boy was there, but you know what? He never got over it because he got married. He had some children, but he was never completely settled in anything, and he killed himself.
Oh no.
I think the whole thing was.
So this is Irene's kids?
This was Irene's. This would be Irene's grandchildren.
Grandchildren. Okay.
No. Yeah, her
Grandchildren.
This was. She had two daughters,
And this would be her daughter's
and
kids.
it was Dorothy Lundy's daughter. She married, and she's the one that had this bad marriage, then she went on her own with real estate and everything and tried to take care of the kids, but it never worked. And she had a girl too, and the girl OD'd quite a few times and had to have her in the hospital. Aunt Rose always protected them and say, she's sick, she's in the hospital. She wouldn't say why. She says, I don't know yet what's wrong. But then I'd hear it was she OD'd. One time she took a whole bunch of aspirin or something. I don't know what it was. So
Didn't know you could do
the
that.
family got into drugs bad, that family. She's still living now, as far as I know. She ended up having,
You're kidding.
I think, one girl or two girls or something. But the marriage didn't work. But the son Dorothy, the daughter Dorothy that had these children that killed them, she always came to our 4th of July thing and brought her dad, Oscar, because Irene died. Well, they had to move out of where they lived. Like I said, it was real nice on the south side, but it went real bad, like Gary. And I said blacks came in. It went, maybe that's not the reason it went bad, but it went bad. And so they moved out to Port Forest and lived there until she died. And then he stayed there till he ended up going down to IU to stay with his daughter. They lived at IU. And she was the one that had to get a lung transplant. And she never was well after she got it. So I think she smoked when she was young, but it wasn't the smoking that did it. It was something else was wrong with her lungs. But that's about it for that family. I don't know.
So he was. Jim,
To make money, he with Rose ran his cleaners in town, and sewing and repairing and tailor. He was a tailor.
Okay. So they had their own shop.
Yes. I think it was upstairs over something downtown Chicago. I'm not sure. Round Point. But they
So both sides of the family really were business.
sort
Right,
of, yeah. He was a top tailor in Europe, and Rose. He taught Rose, and Rose and him did it together in town.
So everybody here was born in the States except for the parents?
Everybody, yes. As far as I know, they were. I know all of these were.
But the parents were not.
They weren't even together until they came to this country.
Okay, so but the father and the mother were both born in Europe.
And
they met here.
And I have the whole story of them.
Right.
But now I lost my train of thought. Something about Oscar and her daughter. They, like I said, he lived to be almost 100. Oscar did, and in fact, he died just a few years before she did with the lung thing. But she ended up working at IU, and she loved it down there. She worked it in the department that had a music department, and she even was playing the French horn for a while. And also they had, let's see, something I was going to tell you. Oh, I know what it was. 1893 was a big fair in Chicago, and World's Fair.
Yeah.
World's Fair. And
That was the Columbian World's Fair in 1893. I wrote about it all in my book.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, I got a whole long passages about it. Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, a lot of things started at that fair.
Oh yeah, the Ferris wheel, ketchup, electricity, right?
A lot of things.
Right.
I had pictures of the fair and stuff. But I remember Mary, was it Mary? Not Mary. Somebody in the family were complaining because they couldn't go because they were pregnant and ready to have a baby, and they couldn't go to the World's Fair, and they were real unhappy. I don't know, it couldn't have been Mary because Jim wasn't born until 1916. But I don't know. But anyway, he entered a vest, that kind that he would make in Europe.
Okay.
He made clothes for the royalty people, the kings and queens and all that. And he made this vest and entered it, and it won. So when she died, she had everything, and they had always said she had that medal from the World's Fair. So they just, when they had, after she passed away, we gave her a plot. She didn't have any, so she's buried in a plot that we had, that Jim's dad had there for him and his wife and his child. And since Jim was married, he didn't know whether he'd ever use it, and they didn't have anything for her, so we gave it to him. So it's right near her brother then.
Okay.
And it's also right by him. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Right.
But anyway, when they said, well, I was there too at the house after she died, and I mentioned something about that, and they said, we've looked everywhere for that, we can't find it.
For the medal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
from the World's Fair. So, but, so they had I don't know how well they did, but they evidently could support the family. But I think they all worked as they got old enough to work, they worked. you
So
know.
how did Mary raise Jim by herself? I mean, that's, a 3-year-old, that would be pretty challenging.
It was.
Yeah.
I have pictures of her and with him, so, at that time.
Right.
And, well, she said when she stayed at Crown Point a little while, and she remembers he was just a little one, and she'd have him in a cart, push him out to the graveyard and sit by. You still go out there and see, because they got a grave that has his picture on it. Yeah, pretty unique.
Yeah, right. That
And
must be
it
nice.
also has weathered well. Yeah, it's just as bright
You can
as
see it, huh?
Oh, just as bright as can be.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a round picture. In fact, there's one in here that's on that.
Off of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And they, so, I don't know what they all did. They all got married and left, and Helen was a sweetheart. She married a widower from Rensselaer, and ended up, she didn't marry him until she was, I think, probably pretty late into her 30s, probably almost 40. And he had like 6 children, and his wife died.
Oh,
So
Lord.
yeah, and they were all from like that. She raised those kids. She was a wonderful mother to those kids. Never had any of her own, but she raised all them. And we always felt they were never very appreciative of the fact of all she did for them.
Yeah, you'd think so. They should be.
Yeah, maybe some of the youngest girl, but we went to her funeral, and we went back down to the house where people were bringing in food all over, and they never asked us in or anything. But her husband was not a very considerate man. And here's little Jimmy with his grandpa hetzler. And you could just barely see Jim.
So that would be her father.
No. Oh, yes.
Yeah,
yes,
right?
Yes. He looks kind of like something else. And this tells you all about Mary's mother and father. And this is her mother.
So this is him.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is the whole story, where they came from, the whole thing. And she was, like I said there, she was the matriarch of the hetzler family. So she'd walk around. She ended up getting all these businesses. This was when she was still living. George they each had their strip after she died. But this is when she was still living, some of this. And they said that she'd walk around with these dresses all the way down to her ankle, and real deep pockets. She'd have an apron on, real deep pockets. And every night she'd walk around to all these places, picking up all the cash, putting it in these deep pockets. Pretty soon she could hardly walk. She was
Carrying around all the
clinking
money.
along.
So she was the one that ended up sort of getting the land, building the businesses and everything?
Along with Mary was very helpful with her. Especially, that's why she would come down there all the time when he was still living, her husband was still living. And the Hetzlers were always complaining about it. I mean, the Kubals were. And then she ended up staying down, moving back down. And the house in Doylestown, in Ground Point, was in a pretty nice neighborhood and everything. And I guess they rented it out, but then she got married, and then they took care of it, and it had Jim and her's name on it, because the dad, before he died, had willed it to his wife and his son. So they, I remember when they were going to sell it, we would come home and Jim was still in the service, and they'd be in their wallpaper, and then I don't know, and then they ended up asking us, or asking Jim, did he want it anymore, because they were going to sell it. And I always thought we should have kept it because it was pretty valuable property. And his dad wanted him to have it, you know. So, but it was sold, and this is all the Hetzlers and all the, you know, this is the ballroom.
No.
And
This is the hotel here, huh?
no, that was a building that, I don't know where that came from. That was probably the next strip of land there, what I said the sister owned, Barbara owned. And this looks like a food stand or something over here. It says motel up the hill. That's probably this.
Well, it got moved over. Okay.
That's what's
Right.
moved across the street, yeah.
Right.
So, this was where the Dairy Queen is now. It's hard to believe that, but, and they used to have these great big boats that they would go over to the, what do you call it? Where the trains came in.
I don't know anything about that stuff either, but you know who's.
And the people were all coming in from Chicago, wanting to get a place to stay. So the hotel, at one time, they said there was 40 hotels around the lake. Can you believe that? That's what I was
And now
told.
there's none.
Hotel and restaurants.
Wow.
They had a place to stay and eat and everything in that hotel.
Right. Okay.
You'd see one would say fried chicken all day or this and that, and the other one, you know, what they'd specialize
Fish
in.
or something.
Well, you know
Right.
where you have the Summerfest.
Right.
You know that hotel that's there? It's a museum.
Yeah.
That was a hotel. And,
Kind of looks like an old hotel.
Yeah, had the rocking chairs all the way around it and all that. And that was Lassen's. That was a man that was senator on that.
Oh,
That he owned the ballroom out over the water and that place.
you want me to pick it up?
And he owned where the golf course is. I mean the yacht club is. There, that building where you had to go by when you go over.
Sure.
Well, he owned that too. That was his home at the time. So, but
Where did she get all of her money? I mean, to buy up all this land and these property and
oh,
everything?
you know what it was? They came over here from Europe during, well, this will tell you about it. But the way I understand,
Yeah, I'll run it there.
the name was Adam and Teresa.
They had a farm on Buck Hill, orchards, raised potatoes, had pigs.
Okay.
Worked as a waitress in a hotel. Conference ground, railroad men roomed there.
They have it already, they just
Yeah.
didn't know where it was at.
Well, they came over and was settling in Hermit's Lake. Here, that's a lake between Cedar Lake and Crown Point. There's a lake back there. It's called Hermit's Lake. Well, they settled there and farmed, and then they saw the they saw
resort.
I guess they got a chance to buy it. Back then, they bought a whole farm in Cedar Lake, right on the lake, and they were going to farm it, and they did. They started to farm it. They had chickens and cows and pigs and everything, right in the land there that got developed, where the stores are, where Dollar General and all that.
Okay, so they had bought it as farmland. I see.
And they could buy all that land pretty cheap at that time, And they were far. Who wanted it? Nobody. So anyway, then they were farming, and they were raising their own food and everything,
All right,
potatoes and everything, and
all right,
but
okay.
then when they got cars, people got cars, and uh, also the railroad went through there. So they all, that was the first thing. They all came out on a railroad. And then all these hotels had boats and they were big long boats, and they would go over to the depot when these people were coming in from Chicago when the train came in. And they'd all line up. George Hetzler had one, and they'd want to get them to go to their place.
They'd pull them right off the railroad, basically. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they'd have big signs of, hotel, food, and all that. And then people would come and get on them, and they'd take them over to their place.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd stay maybe a week, maybe just a weekend, I don't know. But then what really hurt them, but then they decided, these people decided there's a lot more money in the tourists than there is in cows and pigs.
Mm-hmm.
And they started putting up, like Mary had the rented rooms and above, because we don't have pictures of that.
You
I
get
have
that?
pictures of what it looked like before they developed it, There was houses up there and everything. That's why Jim moved all the houses up where we lived. And they were all from those hills there,
Okay.
where they lived.
They needed to move all that to put the buildings in.
Yeah, and then he could move them right up the road. He'd ride on the roof and lift the wires out, so he didn't have to pay anybody. He didn't have to pay the electric company to come and lift those wires. He'd ride on the roof.
Wow.
I have pictures of him riding on the roof. And he'd bring them all up where we lived. You remember the little house
Yeah.
before we built on the wall?
Right.
That's where, that all came from here, all those buildings. The big one that was an apartment house, that was, like I told you, it was Tony's fish house, where he served fish and rooms and stuff. And Jim bought it from him and moved it away. So that's why they were able to get all that land. It was just farmland. Had no value then,
Right.
as far as the lake, So, but then later they found out they could make a lot more, like I said, money from tourists.
Right.
So,
Interesting.